Mama told me I was never going to be shit, and you got my fix. I wish you would ruin this 2-hour trip to New York City, so you better go ahead and get Mama. Loose and strip, Black Rose City baby, age 5, left to fend for herself, eaten alive in a jungle of concrete, swarming with beasts, famished, nothing to eat, soiled tears falling from soft cheeks, tears turn into years as Black Rose City baby is bounced from home to home, wishing to go home. Baby becomes beauty, beaten by men who spell Love, Morse coded into her kidneys. This isn't for me, not my destiny. Black Rose begins to bloom. God exhumes her petals, stretch out to protect young lost girls like Mary who share her world.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Nadine Lee, founder and CEO of Speak the Dream Foundation. I am here at the 2011 ESPY Awards on the red carpet.
When you meet Nadine Lee, you're instantly struck by her style, class, and elegance. But you would never know she was abandoned at the age of 5 years old, shuttled through the foster care system, held at knife point, and struggled with the brutal murder of her mentally challenged younger brother. After 2 years of deliberation, Nadine Lee has decided to go public with her painful story with hopes that it will save a child's life. One of the earliest tragic situations you felt throughout your entire life was being abandoned by your mother. If you could take us back to that time period and give us a sense of what that felt like.
That day when I was walking hand in hand with my mother, and I was probably about 4 or 5 years old. So we walked into a business establishment that was on that particular street. And my mom and I walked in, and so while she talked with them, I sat down on what was a window seat. And I'm sitting on the window seat and I'm playing, and my mother's talking, and I hear them chatting. And after a few minutes, my mother turned around and started walking towards the door, and I jumped down off the window seat, and I, proceeded to grab her hand and go with her. And she said, no, you're going to stay. And I stayed with her. And my mother just walked out and she left. Well, as it got dark, I realized that my mother hadn't come back. And the couple, they were closing down the establishment, and I said, well, it's time to go now. And I didn't understand. And they took me to their house, and well, 2-3 days went by. And I remember one day, the first time I saw my mother after she left me there, and she walked by, and I was sitting on the window seat on my knees with my hands up against the window as I saw my mother, and I got excited, and I thought, that's my mother, and I'm thinking she's coming to get me. And what I noticed is that she didn't stop. She kept walking, but she never looked at me. She just kept walking. And I didn't understand, why doesn't she come back and get me? And I could see my breath on this window, and as she walked by, I'm confused and didn't understand, why didn't she even look at me? She never came back.
But can you imagine what this woman went through when her mother held her hand, walked her into the store, and just released her hand, released her to the world, and said, go ahead, you're on your own. And this child was no more than 5 or 6 years old. I can only imagine the depth of despair that her mother had to go through. I can only imagine the depth of despair that Nadine went through, of sitting there and not knowing whether her mother was ever coming back. And the reality was, her mother never came back. You were then placed into the care of your grandmother. Being placed in the care of your grandmother, most of us would say that you're safe, everything's, you're going to be cared for, this is a family member. Describe that situation.
Well, one summer my grandmother somehow was able to find out where I was, and she picked me up for the summer, my mother's mother, and I would get to see my brother again, or at least one of my brothers again. And we spent the summer, but she never took us back. What I noticed was after a few months, my grandmother was very, very, very angry with the fact that she had to take care of us, or she had chosen to take care of us. She was very abusive physically, she was very abusive verbally, she was very abusive emotionally. And as a little girl, I think I was probably about maybe 8, 9 years old, she made it very clear to me that my brother was the one who was handsome and I was the one that was smart. When she got angry, she would yell with this tone of absolute disdain. She would call me a black cow. You know, you're a black cow, and I don't love you. I don't love any of you. And she would say this over and over and over again. And I realized that permeated into my psyche. But I believe that my skin color was ugly. That I was dark and black and I was ugly, and it's just an ugly thing. My brother was suspended from school, and there was a kid that picked on him, and he basically was defending himself, but he was suspended, and according to my grandmother, that was just unacceptable regardless of the reason. She insisted that he was going to get a whooping for being suspended and misbehaving in school. She asked him to take all of his clothes off and to get down on all fours. And when he got down on all fours, she held his head between her knees, and she had gone outside and gotten a piece of a garden hose about that long. And she held his head between her knees and she whipped him with that garden hose. I remember crawling into a corner in a fetal position, covering my ears, because I could hear him wailing and screaming, and there was nothing I could do. I could hear that wailing and screaming until probably about 2 years ago.
By the time Nadine reached high school, she had become a thriving student, until she had unfortunately found out that she was pregnant. Her foster care mother suggested that she get rid of the child, or else she would have to leave the home. But Nadine refused to give up on this child the way she had been given up on as an infant herself. On March 15, 1980, Nadine's first child, Dana Scott, was born. And in September of 2012, Dana Scott will be receiving his master's degree in communication, further proving that Nadine made the right choice. By the time Nadine was 40 years old, she had 2 children of her own, Dana and Ashley, who were both very successful in the classroom. Nadine wanted to pass that type of success on to other children that were not hers. She simply wanted to teach other children how to imagine.
Tell me what the word imagine or imagination means in reference to the relationship you have with this young child.
I began spending time with him, and one evening he was on his way to bed, and I would lay and talk to him right before he'd go to sleep. We were looking out of the window, and I said, can you look up at that plane and tell me, imagine where that plane is going. All the people that are in that plane, imagine where they're going. And he says, well, I don't know what you mean. I don't understand. Can you give me an example? And I thought, this is a 7-year-old child who doesn't know what it's like to imagine. He doesn't know what it's like to pretend or to imagine. So I gave him an example, And I pulled out a map and I showed him a map of the world, that there are so many different places and so many different, there's just so many different places that you can go to. And so the next night we came back and we laid looking out the window, and we looked up at another plane, and I said, so can you tell me, where do you think, imagine where that plane's going? And he says, well, I imagine it's going to China, or it's going to London, or it's going to Australia, or maybe it's going to New York. And that was a defining moment. And I'd say about maybe a week later, he was playing outside, and I was listening to him as he played outside, and I heard him talking. I heard him talking, and he had like these transformer toys, and I could hear him talking. I'm thinking, who is he talking to? Maybe he's talking to a neighbor. And I go and I peek at the door, and he's talking to himself, and what he's doing is he's imagining, and I stepped back because I started to cry, because he's coming back to being a little boy, which is where he should be. And when he finally came inside, I picked him up off the floor and I hugged him and I kissed him, and he's like, well, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Nothing's wrong. I'm just happy. And those are the things that drive me to do what I do, that children are allowed to be children, that they're allowed to understand, that they're entitled to understand that they're loved. Their innocence should not be taken away, not through molestation, not through rape, not through any type of abuse. And if they are abused, we have a right and we have a responsibility to make sure that they understand that that's not their fault. They did nothing to deserve that they are worthy, that they are amazing, that they are incredible. And we have a responsibility to make sure that they understand that, and they grow up to be some of the most amazing people we've ever seen.
In making this film, the thing that stuck out the most to me was Kevin, her brother. I mean, this young man never had a chance.
My brother was born with fetal alcohol syndrome because my mother drank. And with fetal alcohol syndrome, the brain doesn't develop properly because of the alcohol. And there are some other developmental issues that a child is often born with. He was underweight and just a bunch of other issues. And he also went through withdrawal from the alcohol. When she took him home, he would cry a lot because he was going through the withdrawal, and one day he was crying just a little bit more than she might have liked, I guess, or more than she could handle, and she tried to suffocate him with a pillow. When that didn't work, she attempted to throw him out of the window, and someone must have called the police, and the police got there in time before she dropped him out of the window. And he was taken from her and eventually put in a hospital in New York before my grandmother picked us up, because when she picked my brother and I up, she also picked him up as well. When we were separated by being put in foster care, because they separated my youngest brother and I, because he believed I was his mother because I took care of him a lot of the time. I didn't know that they were going to separate us. And so when we arrived at his foster home and I realized that we were being separated, it was absolutely devastating for me. I didn't know if I'd ever see him again. And eventually he was adopted, and the family that adopted him, They beat him. They broke bones. They put him in the hospital several times. He was raped and molested, and they gave him back to the system.
So he wanted to meet his mother. Time moves on. And then a couple of years ago, you get a phone call.
I get a phone call from my mother, and she leaves me a voicemail. And she says to me, Nadine, the police were just here. They said Kevin is dead. So I returned the phone call and I said, well, what do you mean? I don't know, but this is what they said. And so I contacted the police, and to make a long story short, he was living in a sort of a rooming house because of his mentally developmental issues. He couldn't live alone or unsupervised. And evidently he had been stabbed to death in his room by someone he knew. And he was gone. I couldn't get out of my head how his life started, that his life would end that way. The fact that when he was killed, he was looking at his assailant as he was being stabbed. And I thought to myself as a child, because I still, even though he was in his 30s, late 30s, I'm still thinking of this child who was thrown away and that never had the opportunity to feel, to really truly know unconditional love, who still couldn't understand why his mother had left him, why all these things were happening to him. And all of those things were running through my head, and I had such anger and sorrow for that child because it took a while to get past the anger.
You're angry at your mother? Were you angry at society?
I was angry at a few people. I was angry at the couple who had adopted him, who beat him and raped him, and I was angry at a lot of people, that everybody had failed him. Everyone had failed him. I was in some ways angry with myself that maybe I hadn't done enough, that there must have been something I could have done that could have prevented his life from being so horrific. But at the same time I thought, well, you know, whatever pain he lived with, it's now over. He just doesn't have to live in the pain anymore.
Despite all of life's setbacks, Nadine Lee has focused all of her energies into a group she started in the year 2008 called Speak the Dream, a group designed to help the disadvantaged children in the Los Angeles area. Nadine also found it in her heart to go back and find her ailing mother, who is now living alone. She drove this woman from Connecticut back to the Los Angeles area with the intent of not abandoning her mother the way her mother had abandoned her. This type of compassion and love is something that Nadine is proud of.
What was the greatest way that you forgave your mother? What was the most profound thing that... It's something that if you share that with us, a lot of people would say, I could never forgive her for all of the things that happened. Your brother's died, because it's connected.
Not forgiving her, kept me angry all the time. It was a poison in my system. I was angry. Anything attached to my mother or a mother, I was angry. I was angry all the time. I didn't want to be an angry person, because that also meant that I wasn't going to be a very good mother to my own children if I'm carrying around anger about my own mother. In many cases, it dictated my behavior and the way that I responded to things with my children, in my life. That's not what I wanted. I deserved more than that. About a year and a half ago, actually within days of the time that my brother was murdered, she had a stroke. And I got a phone call that she'd had a stroke and she had a brain aneurysm. And I was told that, she's not doing well. Well, my inner struggle at that time was, is this really something that I want to take on? Because she never took care of me, so why should I go back and take care of her? And I realized that, if I don't do this, she's going to die alone. She's going to die on the floor by herself, potentially, never, ever, ever having felt that anyone loved or cared about her. In retrospect, I could have taken the position of, well, she's my mother. She owes me. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter. She is a person who is still, she's a child who is still stuck at that point where she was traumatized and has not been able to move past that. Now, if I am in a better place, what difference does it make that she's my mother? What should matter is that she's a human being, and if there's something that I can do to show her something different, I need to do that.
Going to the office, raising me, taking me to preschool, and picking me up after her day's work, and going home and coming home to my mother. She was there, washing me in the sink when we lived in Brooklyn. Things of that nature. We weren't, rich. We were very poor, but we got by, the way that a mother and son do.
Christ the King has heard my plea. The faithfulness of the Lord.
After going through all of that, how can you rise up to make it to the red carpet? How can you rise up to help other little girls? How can you do that? And it just shows the character. It shows the strength.
My mind has been renewed. I have learned to trust in you as Christ the King. You lives inside me. Thank you for healing me. Continue to purge
But if you have children of your own, how do you not have compassion for another child? It doesn't matter whether you gave birth to that child or not.